5 seconds.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, 28th of March, 2023, and you're listening to Body Talk on the No Static Radio Network. I have some great news. The No Static Radio Network has some additional call letters. The call letters are WMDS. Also, in the immediate future, the No Static Radio Network will have an FM radio band for listeners to listen while they're driving in their car versus trying to pull it up on YouTube, Facebook, and other social media outlets. This is the Body Talk program utilizing the WMDS call sign. Again, today is March the 28th. I thank you for being here. This power panel, which is a group of great individuals, I'll introduce them in a minute. The power panel is being brought to you by Howard Window and Power Washing. It's that time of the year to prepare your home for the spring and summer. Contact Howard Window and Power Washing by calling 216-403-0634. Call Howard for a quote. Again, that number is 216-403-0634. Today on Body Talk, we have our first power panel. We have some very distinguished guests. To my left is Mr. Jeff Dogget. He hosts a show on this network, the No Static Radio Network, called The Right Side. It's on Saturdays from 3 to 5 p.m. To my immediate right, the outstanding, beautiful young lady, Richanda Burks Jackson. She's the CEO of 2 Biosphere Incorporated. And the gentleman to her right is a good friend of mine, a very learned man, very smart man, because he knows me, Hiram. What we're going to do today, we have 4 broad topics that I did share with the panelists. And excuse me, the other panelist, Lila Parker, she's a journalist and a writer for Signal Cleveland. She had a family emergency. She might have the opportunity to call in. If she can, we'll add her to the discussion. I did share with the panelists 4 broad topics. And in the first hour, we're going to talk about education and job creation and job opportunities. And I think as the time passes, you see how we're going to build this base or network building here. Okay. And let me give a disclaimer. Any comments that the guests, the power panelists might make are not to be associated or owned by No Static Radio Network. Those comments, impressions, ideas, and statements are theirs, excuse me, solely. So let's get started. The first discussion deals with education. And education, when we talk about this, we're going to start at the public school level. So if I say primary, that does not limit it strictly to kindergarten, 6th grade. It's from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And if the audience recalls, which I didn't share with you, so it's my fault, we're here in Cleveland, Ohio. And if you want to contribute to the discussion, please feel free to call 216-939-5087, or you can email your questions or comments to bodytalkradioprogram@gmail.com. So let me lay the foundation. Cleveland is an urban city, which is code speak for black and brown, or predominantly black and brown. Across this country, if you look at the majority of the urban school districts, such as New York City, Miami, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Los Angeles, and we can go on and on. Most of those school districts are failing. Now, some people get offended when you use the term failing, so let me try to be politically correct. They're struggling, and that means from a student perspective. And I'm going to first go to Jeff here. What do you think the issue is with public school education?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on to be a part of this panel. When I heard you talking about the other 2 guests, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? But I digress. The issue is multifaceted. One, when you look at the economic base, and we'll just use the city of Cleveland, but it's typical, basically, as you said, of sadly most major cities here in the United States. When you look at the economic base of the median income of the family of the average student, it's either at or sometimes below the poverty line, or maybe just barely above the poverty line. Now, there are a lot of issues that go with that. There's a large preponderance, if you will, of single parent, female headed households, and there's a larger preponderance of those that are on some type of government assistance and what have you. So you don't have the typical family structure that enforces education, and not to try to sound like the old guy, hey, you kids get off my grass guy, but when I was coming up through the Cleveland public schools, my parents went to PTA, my parents made sure that I was doing my homework, they checked my homework, et cetera, et cetera. When you have an age difference, when the student is 10 and the mother that's raising them is 25, then you have that dynamic as well. That's number one. Number two, the schools are not funded properly, in my opinion. And that's a whole different avenue we could go down regarding as to how they are funded and how they should be funded. Also, too, the teachers are working in a lot of cases with not the materials that they need in order to better facilitate the education of our children. So you have those, and there's so many more issues. But I'll stop and I'll let some of your other distinguished guests speak.
Richanda, if I may, and I'm going to share with the audience that you primarily, your expertise is in the crisis and trauma arena. So looking at the schools, what do you see as the most prevailing issue going on right now?
In my opinion, and I definitely can concur with a lot of things that Jeffrey said. In my opinion, a lot of it is the inability to teach because of behavior. And a lot of children are going to school and they're coming from homes where there's no guidance, there's no direction. They're coming from homes where they have been traumatized and they're taking that behavior into the schools. And so on top of not having the resources, now the teachers are spending the majority of their time correcting, trying to guide, trying to put children, deal with behavior issues. On top of that, I definitely agree with the allocation of funding. It shouldn't be a discrepancy between a suburban school and an urban school. If suburban schools have computers, why don't urban schools have computers? I don't think that there's a lack of funding. I think people are not being good stewards over the funding that they've been given for our education misuse.
Okay, Hiram?
So I'm an old school guy like you. I actually started out in the Cleveland Public Schools. The first 3 years here, coming from Puerto Rico. So a little different at that time and in that space in Cleveland. They didn't have ESL or any language programs for students. Believe it or not, and Al will attest to it, I've known him for a long time, they put me in a class for educable retarded because I didn't understand what they were asking me to do. I was blessed. I actually, we moved into the, what they call the old projects, Lakeview Terrace off of 25th, and we had Irish nuns who actually spoke Spanish. Wow. So that helped get me acclimated. But I think if we fast forward, and both of the guests here have touched on a couple of things, funding for our schools are based on real estate values. And unfortunately, the suburbs have a higher value on their property, therefore there's a higher tax. And I think we need to reevaluate and reassess how we fund our schools in that space.
All three of you brought up some good points here, and actually, you can, I'm not saying to hold it. We're going to talk about housing in the second hour,
Sure.
which is fine.
No.
And the issue of how the state appropriates funding for schools.
Right.
If you look at Cleveland, and we're just going to, if you're not familiar with Cleveland, there's some great suburbs from Pepper Pike, Beechwood, whatever. The property values in Cleveland will never ever mirror those suburbs. They won't.
So, and again, and I don't disagree, but I think that's an interesting point because in the near west side Ohio City area, for example, those same houses that I used to walk by to go to school are now selling for $400,000.
Wow, absolutely they are.
And so there are, again, there are some exceptions to that. And what I was going to say is, in addition to the problem with education, we're old school. Three out of the four of us here are old school. But I think we're dealing with influences that we did not have when we were younger. I personally believe that you've got social media, which I think is the third parent in our school systems. Actually, and again, the parents are younger, so some of them are acclimated to it. But even the parents that say I'm hip and I've got Facebook, the kids they're TikToking, they're doing other. So those generational things, and it's an accelerant.
And,
Well, go ahead, Jeff.
just to jump in real quick on what Hiram just said, and really also follow up to what Richanda said, it all boils down. So when you have a weed in your garden, the weed is the visible manifestation of what's there, right? But to get rid of that weed, you just can't cut the top of it off because it's going to sprout back up again. You got to get to the root. And the root in this situation of all of this housing, schools, and what have you is the disintegration, if you will, of the nuclear family. Anytime you see a society where the nuclear family is not established, that it has unraveled, you're going to see that society unravel. You know, despite what some people may believe, and you don't have to believe this if you don't want to, but from my ministerial background, in the very last book of the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, in the very last words that were said in the book of Malachi, before God went silent for 400 years as far as inspiring prophecy, he said that in the last days, I will send my prophet in the spirit of Elijah. He will turn the hearts of their fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I strike the land with a curse. Meaning that anytime you have a society that does not have the nuclear family in place and that father is not in the household, then that society, that city, that school system, whatever you want, housing, whatever you want to call it, is going to be cursed because the family is the foundation of everything.
You listen to the Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network, on the Cross Signals, WMDS. That's interesting that the three of you, and I'm going to be the foil here, okay? That the three of you bring up the family structure. I know of families, let's go back maybe 1 or 2 generations, who migrated from the South, and it was just the mother. Raised two sons, 2 boys, never went to jail, did the military thing, if I may, retired, passed away. If the school system, and we're talking about a broken system, and you don't have to agree with my terms here, remember I'm the foil here. We're talking about a broken system. And I had an opportunity to know and work, I knew Dr. Sanders. Okay. When he first arrived in town, we became kind of buddy-buddy. And he said, well, what do you think I should do? I said, your first 6 months to a year, you shouldn't even be in your office. You need a skeleton key to everybody's home because education starts at home. And for lack of better terms, we're sort of trying to focus this on the young parent. Maybe being silly here, should we pass a law that nobody can get married until they're 30, or nobody can become pregnant until they're 40?
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So, see, one of the things I think, and just going back to the cities I mentioned, with Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, New York, those are all systems controlled by the mayor. Might that be, and taking nothing away from the current or previous mayors, might that be the problem? See, I think when the community loses that control over the education of their children, you have a problem. And I'm going to share something with you. Believe it or not, I do research before I come on the air most of the time. There was a recent article that was written by a young lady by the name of Lena Adams. She's from New York City. And most of her career, she's covered educational policy. And she did, if you want to call it a survey of the parents before they enrolled their children, similar in Cleveland because it's an open system. Here were the 5 top items in order that the parents were concerned with. And I can't speak for Cleveland because the stuff to get through the CMSD. Their first item was transportation. How's my child going to go to and from school? The second item was security and safety in school. I hope everybody's aware what happened in Nashville yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
The number 3 item was after school programs. What do because a lot of parents work, and we're talking about usually elementary school children, but this encompasses everybody. Where are my children going to go? Are you going to take care of them after school? The number 4 item was the special needs. And that encompassed about 20% of those individuals that were surveyed, such as kids on IEP programs. All right. Number 5, the top 5 was academics.
Right, the quality of education.
Quality of education.
Right.
That was number 5.
Right.
So the lower,
The lowest of the bottom. Okay, we could turn the paper upside down. And I found that interesting. And from talking to parents who have school-aged children, and let me use the appropriate term, parents and guardians, that includes grandmothers, aunties, or whoever, they somewhat aren't concerned about what their children are being taught. I don't know if the audience or the panel is aware, there's a 70% illiteracy rate in Cleveland. In some specific wards, it's higher than that. That's scary. And the benchmark, and I think I'm the youngest person at the table now.
That was pretty smooth.
You're welcome.
You're free to think what you want.
Remember what he said. Those comments made by the guests, only the guests.
Exactly.
What's important here is until we refocus, and I don't want to just solely blame, and I don't like to use the term elected officials because they are people. You have the people who are in charge making decisions. What I perceive is they don't listen. Band-aid approaches, you can't put a Band-aid on somebody who needs a tourniquet.
So Al, if I may, that goes into the ideal of going and asking the people what they need. A lot of times we have people in positions where they come in with their knowledge and they say, this is what I think that you need, without actually having those discussions with the people to saying, this is what we need, this is what we care about. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but until you're in that space and understand that space, your knowledge does no good.
And Hiram,
Yeah, and again, I'm just a piano player, but you get to a point where, and understanding how things go. I was raised by a single parent. Mom had 3 before she was 21, and Dad left when I was 7. So that's how I got into the parochial school system. Mm-hmm. And Al, I happen to know that you also are a product of Catholic education, and so there's a need
I think, and again, we're just putting it out there. If there's no focus on the quality of education and what you're getting, and remember, it's not just a question of mug and jug, pouring knowledge into a young kid trying to do that. If that kid's hungry, he's not gonna be paying attention. If that kid knows that on the way home, he might not make it to his door, that's an issue. So you're looking at a lot of surrounding circumstances. And I came up in the old projects, and I used to deliver the press and the plain dealer, and we did all of those things, but it was a different time. And so today, I think that you're looking at the number 2 in your survey. I would say that would be tied with 1 as far as most parents. And while we have inner city schools that have violence, when does this problem get attention? When does it get its attention? When it hits a suburban school.
Well, you know, interesting, and thank you for the shameless plug, that I did go to a parochial school. I'm a proud graduate of Benedictine, and he's an Iggy, St. Ignatius guy.
So we have to talk slow with Benedictine.
That means when I was in high school, I didn't like either one of you guys.
Well, see, what's interesting here, and I know it's easy to talk about when we were,
Right.
Okay, we have to talk about what is. And one of the issues that I'm concerned with, and before I forget, I have to give attribution to that research, comes out of a publication called The 74 that was published on 27 March of this year. Now, if we look today, and Hiram, you brought it up about social media. Right? Some school districts around the country take the kids' phones, but the parents come in and say, give the kid phone back. Right? We've heard the news or the rumors. The first 40 minutes of a 50-minute classroom session is sit down, be quiet, don't touch, don't do this, don't do that. We're talking about more so middle and high school, maybe elementary school. I had a couple of guests on from the JFK Alumni Association, and they do a great job, but when I was graduating, the public schools in Cleveland were graduating like 600 plus kids. Now they're graduating 55, 60 kids. Mm-hmm. My question, just not to the Alumni Association, again, it's tough to get through to people at CMSD. Where did the kids go?
Well, part of that, let me just interject, and a part of that too is that the population difference. For example, I am a JFK alum, and when in my graduating class, there was over 700 people in our graduating class. It was 3,500 students at the high school at the time I went. And the reason for that is that we were part, as much as I'm in denial, we were part of the baby boomer generation, okay? You don't have that anymore. It's just not like that anymore. That's one. Number 2, and I was gonna ask your thoughts on this, but since you brought this up now, I can get it in now. Number 2, you can draw a line of demarcation as far as the Cleveland Public Schools are concerned before 1979 and after 1979. What's the significance of 1979, you asked? That was 1979 is when Judge Richanda's order came down to desegregate the Cleveland Public Schools, and therefore you lost the whole concept of the neighborhood school, and that lost a lot of student population as well.
Well, and I understand the busing issue. I think the busing destroyed the Cleveland Public School system because it took away the community-based education.
Right.
Where you have feeder, the elementary school fed into the junior high school, that shows you how young I am, they call middle schools now. And then middle school fed into the high school.
Which
Right.
was the parochial model. That's
Right.
the parochial model of Catholic education. You went to the grade schools, you actually had junior high like we had, 7th and 8th grade. And you had then.
Well, see, I bring up that, and thank you, Jeff, for presenting the 79 busing. 700 kids in 74 graduated from Kennedy. So the average class size was 32 to 35, if not bigger. If you have 50, then I'll bump it up. If you have 100 kids in a graduating class, there should only be 6, 7, maybe 10 kids in each room. So why aren't the kids learning?
And again, so my answer to that, and I've seen this with young people, if you ask a young person, who was the president during the Civil War? That's a pretty easy answer for us. Okay. A young person may say, I need my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to look it up on the phone. How many terms did Franklin Delano Roosevelt serve?
4 too many.
Well, but they're going to say, who was that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what we take as fait accompli, facts that we grew up with, okay? I like telling people when they say, well, how old is you? I said, what do you mean? Okay, well, when I was born, there were 48 stars in the flag. And the next thing is, oh God, you old. Okay. Well, it's not that long ago. I mean, 1957 was the best year Chevy made their cars. But I think that we have, and agreeing with the busing part of it, you had an actual first time federal removal or federal mandate to begin to deal with issues that they felt were educationally holding back segments of our community. So the road to hell is always paved with good intentions, right? Because what happened then? The parents that could took their kids out of school and they went to Catholic schools. So it was a great migration to schools like Central Catholic and all those other schools that were there. So add to that, that those who couldn't had to stay. You have those other circumstances in those areas and in those neighborhoods where my kid was getting bused. I'm moving out of Cleveland. I had good fortune to work under the Winovich administration back in the day, and we had 750,000 Clevelanders in 1987. What's that population today? And Jeff, you just said how many kids were in your class versus.
Well, and I understand the numbers game. And I'm not saying you're making it a game, just the numbers. But if you look at Cleveland in comparison to a suburb, there's approximately 343,000 residents in the city of Cleveland. Okay? CMSD is comprised of approximately 33 to 34,000 kids. Now, obviously, there's not that many students in the Solon School District. But with the dwindling population, you would think education metrics would be improving, and they're not. They're declining.
Because again, like I said, you're moving out to the suburbs. There's an interesting statistic that Cleveland in 1948 was 1.12 million people. Okay. The census just done in 2020 has us at Cuyahoga County at 1.2 million people.
Well,
so Cuyahoga County, if you look at, Strongsville used to be farms. Strongsville used to be, and other suburbs, Homestead Falls. So those places were country. Okay, that urban sprawl that we have now it speaks to people leaving. I know our challenge in our inner city churches is to keep them populated because they've all left. People have left.
well, see, and you used the term earlier, inner city.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also heard the media and maybe some elected people use the term inner ring.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an inner ring, there has to be an outer ring.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an inner city, there has to be an outer city. Right. But you never hear the term the outer city or the outer ring.
Right.
So just for discussionary purposes, let's just say the outer ring is Westlake or whatever.
Even Lakewood.
Since Cleveland is now an urban city, code speak for black, brown, quote unquote, poor white, whatever that means. So we didn't migrate out.
Couldn't afford to.
Well, no, well, yes and no, because what you see now and as compared to then, let's take the Lee Harvard area, Ward 1.
Is that Ward 0?
Yes, well, I won't even, please don't even make me go there. But Ward 1, which was when my family moved there in 19, was Ward 13 at that time. And when we moved on the street we moved on, there was one other black family there, okay? By December of the following year, the whole street had changed. It was predominantly black neighborhood. At that time, the median income of the people, given the the economics of that time, that economic comparison to what a dollar was worth then and what it was worth now, is very comparable and similar to places like Twinsburg or Solon, or places that people have moved to now. So when I look at black and brown populations in suburbs like Solon, Twinsburg, for example, those of you that are listening outside of this area, those are pretty middle class to upper middle class suburbs of the city of Cleveland. When I look at that population, just reminds me, I said, this is just Oakwood Village. This is just the old, what Lee Harvard area was in the early to mid 60s. So what's happened is that Hiram is correct. Those who could move out, black, white, brown, whatever, have moved, and now, as we said in the very beginning, your economic base, for the most part, there are exceptions, never say all, but for the most part, your economic base within the city of Cleveland is either elderly people who've owned their homes for ages, like my mom's still living, thank God. She's been in that house for over 60 years. And so you've got elderly people that have been there, that were there during the, for lack of a better term, Renaissance. But now, mostly in your city, you've got a lot of people that are low income or either at or just barely above the poverty line, and that's the difference.
And that goes back to the basis, the foundation of our discussion. I understand that since you're only 72 now, Jeff, your mother's been in the house for 60 years. Part of it, and I'm not trying to age people out of a home, individuals have the right to move in, move out, move up, or whatever the case might be. Without the appropriate education, you're stuck, and I'm not saying this applies to your mother because it doesn't. You're stuck.
Right.
If I don't have an education, or if I just dropped out of school, high school, and I just dropped out, not for any family reasons or whatever, I just dropped out, I am not going to get a position sitting in the corner office on the 32nd floor of the KeyBank Tower unless I'm Bill Gates and can create something that puts me in that position to do that.
Well, Al, there are some exceptions to the rule. For example, in the Cleveland public school system, they do have what they call the magnet schools, like John Hay High School, that's geared to the science and the medical arts and medical health. You've got the Cleveland School of the Arts, and these schools have open enrollment where any student that lives in the city of Cleveland can attend. And you have those two just come to mind. There are other magnet schools as well that are specialty schools that cater to whatever that specialty is. But I get your point. To the average high school,
Well,
is what you're saying.
Richanda brought it up earlier, and she compared the suburbs to Cleveland. If the suburbs has X amount of computers, Cleveland should have the same amount of computers. If Kennedy has 2 computers, but John Marshall has 100 computers, something's wrong. We're in the same system. That's within the
Why they
same
started
system.
the busing.
Well, we could debate busing, but that's gone now. Yeah. Open enrollment, and there's some excellent students that matriculate through CMSD. Let me put that out there now. I'm not saying that everybody's struggling here. One of the issues, though, when you have an open enrollment program such as that, and John Hay, whatever that school is, might only accept 20
My
kids.
alma mater, by the way. Watch it.
Well,
That's my alma mater and my daughter's. Thank you.
we're listening to Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network. I'm going to call signals WMDS. Well, and that's good. I'm just using John Hay as a name. Maybe I should say School X, but John Hay. That special school only accepts but so many students. So if the cutoff taking 20 students, they from 100, if you score 100, whatever the test might be, 100 down to 97. Those are the 20 that get in. I scored 96. So where am I going? I'm back at this no magnet school, whatever program that I really don't want to be in. So it goes back to what you do for a living. I'm traumatized. I scored 96 and couldn't get in, so I'm angry.
You're on the waiting list, baby.
Yeah, well, we're going to make the world perfect for a minute. The 20 who did make it in, they're doing well. So I'll never get in. I'm not opposed to magnet schools at all. You know, there's some brilliant kids and there's some not so brilliant kids. If we're running in a race and Hiram finishes first, he should get the biggest trophy. All our trophies should not say the same thing.
And that's what's happening.
That's
what's
happening.
You know, everybody gets a medal.
So everybody gets a medal, and you're right. And you know, just to, let's say, bring it back to home here, we have to find a solution to fix this because I'm dependent on these students, let's say in the next 10, 15 years, to make decisions. Let's say for my retirement, my Social Security, some of the students might even decide to run for political office.
And I'm gonna say, Al, too. I think when I was coming up in school, because I am the youngest one of the bunch,
Did you have a cowbell?
we had things like when you were talking about academics and how from this article in New York, how that was like the one thing that the parents, they weren't really concerned most about. I can also say what we're teaching our children in the school system. Is it life skills to help them in life? Is that why we're concerned about what they're learning? Is that why we're concerned that they're not going to be able to perform or they're not going to be able to do these jobs? I was speaking to a registered nurse who's telling me now that they're allowing their nursing residents to do clinicals on Zoom. How can you possibly understand the connection between a human if you're doing this virtually? And that goes back to what you said about social media and all of that. How are they learning?
Well, so, and first and foremost, in fact, I've had medical professionals tell me that, you know, when you're looking at telemedicine, it's just bad medicine. And, you know, by and large, if you're not being seen, they just don't know. If somebody spots a lump on your throat and calls it into a call show, and that's the diagnosis, I mean, you can't be reliant on that happenstance. I absolutely agree that when you're looking at those professions that require that a patient be seen, or that, and certainly when you're talking about mental health issues, unless you have that first person contact, you're not going to be able, I think, to do an effective evaluation. And then ultimately, and I think this just goes to the education side of things. We just went through the pandemic. I think that they're talking about how this generation of kids are going to be affected. Your 2020 class was supposedly, you know, the one most affected. And I look at just how we've changed the way we interact as society, right? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Zoom meetings. I'm not a big fan of phoning it in. I think that people should show up when they're working. I think that you need to have interaction between student and teacher. I think it takes teamwork to get that kid motivated to do whatever it is that they need to do. And, you know, to your point, there are some kids that have more gifts than others, okay? And we encourage those things. I mean, you should be able to do that. But how many kids who are gifted or talented don't get that attention? And then they have to deal with those consequences of not having been given that opportunity to excel.
Well, let me real quick hit on a thorny subject for a lot of families out here. It's athletics.
Mhm.
Okay? And I'm all for athletes. I was once a great athlete. Legend in my own mind.
Still are.
Your check's in the mail. A lot of parents, and more so students, don't understand something. Only less than 1% of the high school so-called super athletes, they can go to college, and that number dwindles down who make it to the next level. Okay?
It's the elite of the elite.
I mean, you got to be super bad to make it to the league, make it be NBA, NFL, even baseball today. A lot of these kids don't understand it's a means to an end. If you get a scholarship and they pay for you to go to the University of Michigan,
Unfortunately.
you take that scholarship, and the coach can look at you and say, I'm going to give you the scholarship. You got good integrity, character, you're a good student. You might not ever play here, but you can always dress when we played at small community college in Ohio, in Columbus, called Ohio State.
Hey, I'm trying to be good.
We can turn your mic off, Jeff.
Might have to.
So the kids have to understand this is a means to an end. Use your education. But Hiram, you mentioned something about what are we educating our kids to do? I'm gonna go back and use Pittsburgh as a classic example. They left the Rust Belt about the same time as Cleveland did. And the mayor, I cannot remember her name, brilliant woman, she gathered all the colleges within, let's say, a 40, 60 mile radius of Pittsburgh and said, well, what if we want to become an accounting center, the accounting center of the Midwest? Or what if we want to do this, want to do this? And Pittsburgh remade itself. And the universities and colleges said, well, what we're going to do, we'll set up classes for this, for the high school students, so that they can become a pharmaceutical hub. And one of the things that they sat down with, and they said, well, you know what? We're having a problem accepting this student, these students, because they're only reading at this level or whatever. And so she actually had the school system and a partnership drill down and said, we got to improve this so we can give these kids a better life. Now, I don't hear that in Cleveland.
Well, because I think what you're asking, and this is a reimagining of how we educate. I think that if you had tactical education, if you looked at how the assessments are done, and if you looked at how you send a team in, look, in corporate, when there's an issue, they send a SWAT team in to take care of whatever that is that's happening. You can look at the East Palestine right now and the railroads. I mean, they've sent people in. And yet, when you look at future citizens, future taxpayers, people who are actually funding the government, and you're not showing them that there's an equivalency to education. If this happens, then this happens. They don't give that message, or they don't share that this is what's going to happen. And so you have and I at least, I came up the same way, you have kids that believe that they're going to be the next NFL player, they're going to be the next Deshaun Watson, they're going to be the next. And I appreciate that. You need to build up character in a kid, or confidence. I get that. But you also have to have reality 101. And so with that, you and it goes right back to that family core nuclear, this is what it is. Because nobody keeps it real like your family, okay? You can say all you want, but at home, you're going to take out the garbage.
And they rally around them, to your point, Hiram. They rally around those potential athletes. And they promise, right? They promise these things, they pour into them. And then, like you said, there's no other expectations. Like, you go to school, we're gonna pay for you to go, but you're gonna play for us, you're gonna run for us, you're gonna win games for us, you're gonna do this. But there's never that other side to say, okay, what if you're not part of the 1% who doesn't make it? What is your plan? What is your thought? What is the next steps for you? So
again, you're looking at the even consequences. You get hurt.
Hope you get hurt.
You get hurt. I mean, you're talking about sports, you get hurt. And so, again, I try to, and we try to have this conversation, and it's keeping it, on the level and real. The equivalencies, okay? What happens when you drop out of high school? Your lifetime earning drops 75%. I mean, it's just the way it is. If you have some college, this is where your income level is. If you have a master's degree, this is where your income is. And okay, so let's say that hey, I'm not into school. There are some construction trades, and there's some trades that you can't phone it in. You can't phone in a plumber. You can't phone in an electrician. You can't phone in an auto mechanic. I mean, there are things that you have to have hands-on. Mm-hmm. And bluntly, you can raise a family on a $35, $38, $45 an hour job, and you can have a good life.
And that's my point too. They don't push those technical certifications. They don't push that either. It's always, when you get out of college, the expectation is that you go. When you get out of high school, the expectation is that you go to college. What about a trade school? Because I can make six figures in a trade. Max Hayes has it, absolutely.
Well, then they were recognized. You had certain manufacturers, TRW, Eaton Corporation, GM, Ford, that would go to Max Hayes, and they used to pluck the best of the best. And they say, you know what? After 12th grade, you are going to our institutions. You're going to learn how to work and I think that kind of leads into the next topic. I know we're talking a lot of things, but if you don't have responsible corporate citizenship in a community where they know they live there, and so they need to have that. If you look in the 60s and 70s, and I know, Jeff, you came up in that area, and so did you, Al, GM used to sponsor softball leagues, high school stuff. I mean, they had community outreach that was incredible, and this is what they did. They engaged the family. If dad worked there, grandpa worked, that's how you got into the
legacy program.
Yeah, my family, I mean, my parents are from Steubenville, Ohio, and that's, everybody worked in steel mill. I want to go back real quick to something you said before we move on to the next. First of all, I want to say you invoked the school up north. You invoked Pittsburgh. What, you don't want to put the Yankees in there either? I mean, you might go ahead. But anyway, on that list, you said number 5 was the quality of education, or
academics,
at what they're being taught, basically, right? And that's interesting. I wonder if that's just in that geographic region, because if you watch a lot of cable news programming like I do, so to do research for the show that you mentioned, you'll see that Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, Ron Benito Mussolini DeSantis in Florida, and yeah, I said it, and others are putting the parental, and don't get me wrong, so we're talking about parents being involved in school, but putting parental choice of what their children should be taught in schools. They're winning office. They're arguably running cultural wars on that. And the media would have you to believe that this is front and center, one of the primary issues. So the statistics that you gave, were you able to see them by region, or you just looked at that area? Because I'm just curious, because New York and New York City is, quote, a blue, unquote, state. So is it then saying that people in blue states or not conservative, or whatever, however you want to label it, are not really concerned about what their children are learning? They've got these other priorities, and the people that are in the so-called red states or so-called conservatives, or whatever you want to call them, are the opposite of that. What's the dynamic?
The New York study that I mentioned that gave the 5 items, she primarily looked at Manhattan and the Brooklyn area.
Okay.
Now, see, what's interesting, and without getting deeply too much into politics, if you look at a red or blue state, whatever that is today, education is education. Now, years ago, when I was in my 20s, that was a couple of months ago actually, I still stand by this. Don't tell me what I can read. Don't tell me what I can watch.
Thank you.
And don't tell me what I can eat. If you're put in a position in Florida or whatever, or wherever, that particular individual, he's thinking for somebody else. Because I'm just going to use a term, the masses don't want to speak up. If you don't speak up, you are going to be told what to do. And you have the right to say no. Okay? Regardless of where we live, we're talking about the education or the miseducation of our children.
That's right, the miseducation.
So again, I think that, and nobody can disagree that violence in school should never happen. Violence shouldn't happen. But you begin to look at, and again, I don't espouse all of the, certainly not all of the, far left or far right, it's just not there. And by the way, 60%, that's who decides, the independent thinkers. And I think if we're smarter, actually cultivating critical thinking, make the decision for yourself, get the facts. But the other side of that is don't hold the facts back either. I mean, for those of us who went through these things, and you know, I was Huff riots, I was living the projects in the 60s. I mean, things happened. You can't deny that things were happening, because they did. All right, so no one can argue that. But what we need to have is an understanding that, look, you want to learn from your mistake. You want to learn that this isn't the comportment. Don't act like this. You're not getting ahead. You're not going to be in any position to influence people, better yourself, raise that level. You want to help your family. You want to do those things. I mean, my dad left when I was 7. I went right, I had paper up, plain yellow press. I carried them both because we had to eat. This is the way things are done.
And Hiram, to your point about the violence, just to show you the lunacy of this all. What happened in Nashville yesterday, right? There are school districts in the state of Tennessee, since we're talking about education, and I'll appropriately coined it, the miseducation. There are school districts in the state of Tennessee that have banned the book Mouse, M-A-U-S. It's a book about the Holocaust that is very graphic, but they banned it in schools. They banned Ruby Bridges Goes to School, the story of Ruby Bridges, a 6-year-old girl who integrated New Orleans public schools in 1960 or 61.
Norman Rockwell had a picture of her that he
Yeah,
beautiful.
right, exactly. They banned those books in certain school districts in the state of Tennessee. But however you feel, and I know Al, you don't want to go in, and I'm not going to do a debate. I'm just doing this as an example. Assault weapons aren't banned. So in other words, the thing that was used to kill those people yesterday. By the way, the person who purchased those military-style weapons, not saying that people should not be able to own weapons, but these military-style weapons, she purchased those weapons legally. They were not banned, but books that can, furthers a student's mind or a child's mind, educate, those books are banned. So this shows you how, and as a Christian, I'm going to say, I don't want to say a stronger word, I'll say how jacked up our values are.
Well, let me answer that or address that real quick, Jeff. See, first off, information is power. And when you talk about critical thinking, you can't think critically if you're not given information. And that's one of the things that is hidden using that miseducation piece. We're not teaching people how to think anymore. We want somebody, well, you're going to do this, no questions asked, go do it. When you talk about military-style weapons, a .45 is a military-style weapon. A weapon, you could lay any weapon on your kitchen table, and it'll never go off unless somebody pulls that trigger. The young lady, 28 years old, whatever reason, we'll never know because she was killed by the police. We don't know what made her do what she did, unless she wrote it down someplace.
She did have a manifesto, but that hasn't been released yet.
And the other side of this, and again, there is, maybe we came up in a different era, but there was never a reason to have an assault weapon in an elementary school.
Well, to your point, Hiram, and again, I don't want to go because I don't want to take your pro show in a different direction.
Not
You
already
go.
mentioned on how to say it.
But anyway, the assault weapon we had an assault weapons ban in this country it was part of the 93 crime bill. Now, there were a lot of things wrong with the 93 crime bill, but two things, at least in my opinion, that were good about that was the Violence Against Women Act that was part of the 1993 crime bill, but also there was an assault weapons ban. Went into effect in 1994, and this is not Jeff saying it. You can go and look it up. As Marie likes to say, Google. You can go and look it up. Between 1994 and 2004, when the ban expired and was not renewed, mass shootings decreased in this country by 40%. Now, even me, with my public school education, didn't go to St. Ignatius or Benedictine, wasn't at John Hay when it was the the magnet school learning center place that it is now. But even me, with my public school education, with my degree from The Ohio State University, even I can figure out that something must have happened then if the numbers are 40% less during this time. It's not talking about taking away. I understand what the Second Amendment says, but these are called military assault weapons for a reason. They are used to be trained to do in combat to kill as many of the enemy as possible without you being killed. So why not try reenacting, which we know is not going to happen, reenacting the assault weapons ban and just see what happens.
You're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on the No Static Radio Network with the call signals WMDS. Before we take a break, and I'm the foil here, and I'm not advocating, not reinstituting the assault weapons ban. Okay? Why don't we just ban cars? We should just ban cars because they run over people. We can compare when Henry Ford created the Ford or whatever.
But now a car's not designed to do that, though.
Well,
I mean,
like I said,
that's an accident. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
I didn't mean to interrupt. This is George.
I'm just, I think it is. It was a minute ago, but no. From the perspective, I'm just giving a parallel here. That granted, I know people who do own assault weapons, and I don't know if, and I'm a bad term here, I don't know if they're going to wig out tomorrow. I don't know. I don't know if a person's going to get in his or her car and be angry and drive down Euclid. I forgot the city where it happened. New York, where that person just ran over folks. Okay. We as a society have a tendency to pick a flavor, and when something is no longer vanilla, it becomes bitter. And I understand your point, Jeff. I think as a society, we have to determine how we want to live and what we want to do. And again, going back to education, your points are good there, Jeff. Granted, Columbine was the first mass shooting that I can remember. And I wasn't in high school then. I was way out of high school. Those students apparently, or obviously, had some type of mental issues. I remember being in middle school, junior high, and somebody would try to take my fish sandwich. Mm. So what did we do? Either you kind of put your own personal mark on it, or somebody came by and took your fish sandwich. They wore the tray. Today we call it bullying. Mm-hmm. Back then it was like, you stand up for yourself. Okay? We have to decide, and we'll finish the discussion on education after the break and pick up job creation opportunities here. But we have to decide as a society, what is it that we really want? And nobody, and I'm hopefully we will make it through and do the political piece here. I don't hear anybody saying that.
Go ahead.
It's your turn. You're from John Hay.
My mom taught at John Hay, by the way, Spanish teacher.
Well, I wasn't there when it was the John Hay it is now, but my daughter graduated from there. But I think ultimately what people want is safety and security. They want to feel safe. They want to be able to go to the grocery store. They want to be able to go send their children to school. They want to be able to go to places of worship. They wanted to be able to go to these places and know that they're safe and secure. They may not be able to express that, but you mentioned something that was very powerful. You mentioned mental illness, which mental illness is the new pandemic. So now, and if we know that we're not going to, and piggybacking off the conversation you had, if we know that we're not going to ban assault rifles, if we know we can't do certain things, how about we at least build up a wall of protection for those who are in these spaces so that things like that may be limited and happen, because it's happening more and more.
You know what, Richanda, though, to your point real quick about mental illness, two things. Number one, mental illness is not exclusive to the United States.
No, it's not.
There's mental ill people all over the world. Number two, I don't, like Al said, we don't know the shooter yesterday until they release her manifesto. But Peyton Gendron, the shooter in Buffalo, was not mentally ill. The shooter that shot up the Walmart in El Paso in 2019 was not mentally ill. The shooter who shot up the 4th of July parade in Highland Heights, Illinois last year was not mentally ill. Even the shooter who the worst mass shooting ever was at the C&W concert out in Las Vegas. That guy had no history of mental illness at all.
Who said that? The
Well,
news? Is
that
that
well,
what the news
that's
said?
there. I could say that's what was reported.
That was
yes.
But see, one, and we're gonna take a quick break here. When the news media says, well, this person has no record of mental illness, that just means he or she hasn't been diagnosed. The other thing is, anybody who walks into a school or shoots at a concert or does whatever in whatever park, there's something mentally ill with that person.
I agree.
Okay, and I'm not taking on you, Jeff. See, one of the things I think that does go undiagnosed is mental illness, and in some kind of crazy way, most of us,
No pun intended, I'm sure.
well, unless you go to Ohio State, some kind of way, the four of us are this close to falling off that mental table, the mentally stable table.
You know,
Well, at least one of us here statistically does suffer from mental illness.
So interestingly enough, and I was told this by a German lady down in Cincinnati, and she had married a Latino guy, and I said, well, you've got to have patience, right? But she had was making a comment, and it was after they blew up the building, just had the anniversary of it.
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. And part of it was, she said, Hiram, you have no idea what pain people are going through in their personal lives on any given day or at any given time. And I said, well, okay, so my perspective is a little different because I come from an immigrant background. I mean, I come from Puerto Rico, which although it's technically the United States, it's a different culture. And so you begin to meld all these different cultures. And remember, Cleveland used to be one of those places. You had a Polish neighborhood, Italian neighborhood, you had Slovenians, you had Croatians, you had a black neighborhood, you had a Puerto Rican neighborhood. In all those places and spaces, we still managed to be Americans. That was an important consideration. And by the way, very proud to be that. And I think that, and I know we're going into break, but I think when you come onto the other side, I think that people need to remember first and foremost, you live here. You make your bed, you have to face up to whatever consequences you're doing, but ultimately, what do you try to do for your family? Is it from an immigrant standpoint better than what we had? And believe me, some of these people are coming from places where daily terror. I had friends of mine that were actually in Baghdad, that came from Baghdad the first time. And when you're getting shot at going to get milk, okay, and I mean, I understand inner city's rough, but these guys were talking about weapons, assault weapons in the military, just going to get milk. His background was completely different from what we have here. So,
Give listening to the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Network. On the call signal is WMDS. We're going to take a 360-second break, which is for you math wizards. That's 5 minutes, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
What do you think?
So my ear went out.
So Sie sind ein Deutscher.
Yeah, you know what, the chairman
Has violence happened to you or your family? Violence can affect all parts of your life, sometimes in ways you can't see. Violence can affect the way you eat, sleep, and cause you to lose focus, for angry, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. But we're here to tell you that violence doesn't have to keep hurting, and you can change your life starting now with help from the Trauma Recovery Center. We want you to take control of your life because today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So listen, don't let violence control you. You can break free and TRC can help. Give them a call at 216-644-5487. They will come to you wherever you are. They offer real help for real needs in real time. They can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Again, they can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. They're free, they're 24/7, and they're confidential. So, look, if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life and your health after violence starting today. Call today. Get the help you need today. 216-644-5487. Again, 216-644-5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. And as we do 6 days a week, every week here at No Static Radio, we celebrate our history 365. And in celebration of National Women's Month, we would like to celebrate a few women closing out this history month. And in honor of Women's History Month, I'd like to introduce to some, a few, introduce to some and reintroduce to others. Jesus Maria Sanchez Perez, born in Spain. Jesus Maria Sanchez Perez is a neurosurgeon that was granted the U.S. patent 2,617,944 for serial, listen up, you guys, röntgenography circulatory systems for x-rays, you guys. So big shout out to Miss Perez. Also born in Salvador, El Salvador, Jacoba G. Maria was granted the U.S. patent 4,366,935 for the device and process of spinning or twisting and winding yarn. So for all you knitters out there, thank Jacoba G. Maria for that. Also born in Honduras, Elena Nunez was granted the patent for 4,935,254 for the banana flavoring process. So for you guys that love all things banana, including that good old banana pudding, you can thank Ms. Nunez for that, and 3 other related patents. And finally, Ellen Ocha. I hope I said that right. It's spelled Ochoa. Born in California, Ellen, was granted the U.S. patent for 4,838,644 for position, rotation, and intensity Everett recognizing methods, and 2 other optical related patents. She was the first Hispanic woman to go to space when she served on a 9-day mission aboard the shuttle Discovery in 1993. So listen, you guys, I tell you all the time, you don't want to go visit your nearest library. Google. Knowing your history is knowing your now. I'm Decisive, and now back to Body Talk with your host, Ayl Bridges.
Thank you, Marie. Welcome back to Body Talk. I have 3 wonderful guests on our panel for Body Talk. We have to my left, Jeff Dogget, the host of The Right Side, Saturdays from 3 to 5. To my right, we have Richanda Jackson Burks, the CEO of Two by a Share. And we have Mr. Hiram over here. Before we get back to our discussion, I want you to focus on the desk where you see the 2 thinkers, the 2 gold statues. Next month is Minority Health Month, and this particular show is going to focus on some minority health issues, but to give advance notice to all the men of color, and you don't have to be a man of color, this health fair is the 2023 Minority Men's Health Fair, being sponsored by Metro Health, being led by a good friend of mine, Dr. Motlin. And you have to call. It's on April the 27th from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And it's at the main campus, 2500 Metro Health Drive. It also is going to be held at 6835 Broadway Avenue in the Cleveland Heights Medical Center at the 7th Circle. You have to call and register if you want to participate. Please call 216-957-3862. That is for the Minority Men's Health Fair. It's important for men to begin or continue to take care of themselves. There's silent killers out here, such as prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease, CVD, hypertension. Take care of yourselves. If you want to be around and outlive your wife or your girlfriend or your significant other, so you can collect the insurance policy first. Take care of yourself. Again, the Minority Men's Health Fair on April 27th. Before we get back into the discussion, I'm going to ask each one of the panelists, and I'm going to start with the oldest one first, Richanda. If you would please share with us who is your women's figure, historical figure.
Well, my women's historical figure is my maternal grandmother. My maternal grandmother, Pinky Mae Jackson. She passed away when I was 14 years of age, so not that long ago. She showed me what real love looks like. She loved her family. She took care of her family. She took her family in. She was there with her family to the end. And she also died at a very young age. She was 50 when she passed away of sarcoidosis, which is a lung disease.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved her. She showed me from the time she was in my life. She was my mentor. She was my voice. She was my wisdom. So I just want to give honor to her.
We'll go to the youngest, the second youngest, Hiram.
Thank you. You're very kind. So I got it. There's it's kind of tough. Sister Michael Marie in grade school for me when I first got over from public schools. You haven't lived until you've heard Spanish with an Irish brogue. Who I be ¿Cómo estás? I never heard anything like that. Not only inspired, but demanded the best of me in getting things done. And I gotta say that I have a little sister that is now 50. God love her. I actually walked her down the aisle in 1999. She has three boys. The last one has special needs. But there's a love light in her that is amazing, and she has been Mom had her at 15. When I was 15, Mom had me at 15, so I ended up being surrogate father for her and walking her down the aisle. And lastly, the girl that I love in my life, Candy, has been. There's been exactly three women in my life that have said I'm proud of you, and it was those three women. The rest of them pretty much, and I love them. I mean, you love your mom, you love your aunts, you certainly love your other siblings, but the other ones had more of an expectation of me to be the dad, to be the, and you shouldn't put that on a 7-year-old kid when I was first coming up. So, but thank God, with those three, I beautiful, beautiful women, and I think that to me is feminine love, feminine beauty. So,
Thank you both. And to the oldest person on the panel, Jeffrey.
So you want me to talk about women's figures? So, no, that kind, not that kind. Okay, I'm sorry. You forgive me, audience. I have not matured yet. One of these days I will, but unfortunately today's not that day. But I was sitting here listening and thinking, who can I say? I mean, there's so many. Fannie Lou Hamer, Angela Davis, Shirley Chisholm, Dorothy Dandridge, Melina Horn, etc. But I wanna focus in on Althea Gibson. Althea Gibson was a tennis player who was the first black woman to ever win Wimbledon. And given at the time that she was playing, and you have to remember that this was way before the Williams sisters and all that she had to face. So she's the famous one. My not so the everyday ones, of course, are my mom and my two grandmothers, my maternal and my paternal grandmother, who were pillars of their church in Steubenville, Ohio, Second Baptist Church. And the very first time that I ever preached there, some few years ago, it was just a flood of emotions that came over me to think that while neither one of them were around, you know, I was the answer to one of their prayers that their grandson would stand in the church that they were the pillars in to preach. So those are just a few.
Thank you. And I have 3 or 4, but I'm gonna do them really quick for time's sake. The first one is a young lady by the name of Captain Janet Days. She's a Navy officer. She became the first black woman recently to command Norfolk, Virginia Naval Base, which is the largest naval base in the world. She comes with an impressive background, which I'm going to save for another day. But she served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J7 planning. She's also a pilot, and she's on her way to becoming an admiral. She'll probably get her first star sometime, let's say October, maybe February, October of this year, maybe February of next year. The other 2 people, well, I'm going to do this quick. Somebody mentioned Ruby Bridges, and I'm only bringing her up again because of what's going on in Florida, where nobody is permitted to watch the Ruby Bridges Disney movie. It's part of history. The suffering and anguish that we, people of color, endured is American history. And I'll always stand with Ruby, because if you haven't seen that famous picture of her going to school for a year, she was escorted by 3 white U.S. Marshals. Her parents could not take her to school. She sat in a room by herself. One teacher volunteered to teach her. She was eventually fired. Ruby grew up, matured, and I'm sure Ruby is traumatized. I would not doubt that. She went on to earn her doctorate, and she still fights for the justice of that. The other 2, these are teenagers from New Orleans, 2 black girls. And you know, I'm a former academic. And 2 girls, Cecilia Johnson and Nakaya Jackson, they just presented at a American Mathematical Society on March 18th. These 2 high school girls figured out something that's 2,000 years old by using trigonometry, the Pythagorean theorem. And they went and presented their results at this conference. They were up against other colleges, Clemson, Cal State, Florida. I mean, the heavy boys, the big boys. And these 2 girls turned that conference out by using trigonometry. The other one is a lady that I know by the name of Janet Morgan. She took on an entire political system because her son was killed. And the prosecutor, state's attorney, declined to prosecute. She did everything she could to ensure that man was not reelected. He was on the statewide or countywide Democrat at the time. Eventually, when Obama became president, he was nominated to serve as the U.S. Attorney, North Florida region. She rallied again, sat down with Senator Bill Nelson, and said, "Don't sign that blue slip." And he asked why, and she told him. And guess what Bill Nelson didn't do? He didn't sign the blue slip. Okay. The other one, of course, is my mom. I come from a 2-parent family household. My mother had the softer hand, but she always said, "You can do anything you want to do. You can be anything you want to be." And somebody at this table heard me say this in some remarks. She was the one who gave me the statement, said, "Don't you dare try to become an important person, but I want you to do important things." Okay? So let's continue our discussion. You're listening to the Body Talk radio program on No Static Radio Network. And I'm not trying to chew with the audience. We're going to somewhat zoom through job creation. How do you create jobs in an environment where you don't have a well-educated populace? What do you do?
So without creating you need to have a need, and I've said this to anybody who'll listen. This country used to make things. This country used to manufacture things. And again, we have a lot of technology. Certainly, robotics has a place, but ultimately, you have to have a way for people to have the dignity of work, to have that bringing home a paycheck, raising a family, doing those things. And so, how do you become a job creator? I think it's a partnership between public and private. I think that we have a responsibility from government to encourage the growth of business, attract businesses, and we have a responsibility on the other side from the educational institutions that are there, and we spend a lot of time talking about education. People have to be ready to work. They have to have a mental, spiritual, and certainly a physical capacity to perform.
Hiram, and I just want to be clear, government doesn't create jobs.
No.
They create an environment for jobs to come.
Policy.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. And again, I was blessed to work with a couple of great people back in the 80s. I was part of the Bush administration, and we had the Minority Business Development Center that was funded through the Department of Commerce. And if you look at Ohio as a state as a whole, we actually passed House Bill 584 back in 1980 that created opportunities for black, brown, red, yellow. And that law was actually somewhat diluted and modified through the 1988 Croson decision that changed a little bit of what we were doing. And it was a Republican administration that did that. And so I used to always, we would say this, and there are companies and there are individuals that are still in Cleveland that have made their living here and have they've become millionaires based on the efforts that we had back in the day. We were an all-American city 5 years in a row, and I'm blessed to say I was part of that 4 out of the 5 years. But we did $100 million a year in minority and female contracting in both the public and the private sector. So it was pretty impressive back then.
Richanda?
I think that in this culture that we're in now, a lot of people are really into entrepreneurship. A lot of it has to do with the workforce. The jobs that are created, they're not sustainable financially. They don't allow the freedom to be with family, and so people are really kind of looking away from that. So I think it has to be an appeal, like you said, policy. It has to be appealing for those. They have to do something that they want to do, that they feel that they're making a difference. Not just going in and punching someone's clock and not being appreciated, not being respected, not being honored, not being, and not being, again, it's not sustainable financially, mentally, or emotionally. And so when we talked about education and how there used to be classes like home ec and things like that, teaching them how to work and how to prepare. Same thing for now. People don't know how to. A lot of people don't know how to fill out job applications. They don't know how to do interviews. They don't know how to do resumes. So preparing them and showing them and giving them the tools that they need is definitely key.
Well, before I go to Jeff here, so you mentioned we used to call it life-work balance. And that's one of the biggest. It's a fancy, nice catch-all term. There's no such thing, correct? Mm-hmm. I work for one of the big 3, and if I work less than 80 hours a week, I was working part-time. Mm-hmm. All right. And again, you mentioned the term financially viable. Now, regardless, I want to get into politics here, it doesn't really matter. The minimum wage, not the federal wage, locally, bumped up $15 an hour. Is that a survivable wage in the city of Cleveland?
Not in my opinion either.
No, technically it's not. In reality, it is not. So at what point do we prepare people to get past that minimum $15 wage? And I don't want to go back to that education thing. I think you see how we're building this piece here. If you don't have nothing to offer, you're going to get nothing.
Well, you can't fill out the job application if you can't read.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right, so again, and what are we looking at? I mean, life skills are being what they are. I am amazed, and even in people's communication skills, just trying to get them to understand that you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. When you come in and you see that you're whether it's a job interview or you're out hustling, what you do and how you present and what it is that the employer is looking for or the customer is looking for if you're self-employed. It's critical that be on time, do what you say, and simply put, finish what you start. Those are three things that we used to be just honed in on us all the time. And if I had that same conversation with somebody coming, whether they're just finishing high school or finishing college, I don't seem to get that same kind of feedback. So maybe it's just me.
Well, I think it's just one of the issues that I've encountered even when I was out there working like that. The atypical younger person doesn't even have soft skills. They don't know how to say no, thank you, please, or whatever. And your first impression is your last impression. Excuse me, Jeff, go ahead.
No, go. No,
No, we're finished. I'm finished. We'll go
So
back
no,
to Ohio
but-
State.
Basically, I was just going to agree with what Hiram said. I mean, I think he hit the nail on the head. And also to add on to what Richanda was saying, we need to do so on that the education end without getting back into that discussion. But we need to do some training, basic training. This is how you present yourself in an interview. You look the person in their eye. You wear business attire. You sit straight up. You don't slouch. You don't have every other sentence. You know what I'm saying? So this is how you fill out. This is how you put together a resume. This is how you fill out an application. When I was working, I saw firsthand. I worked for a corporate travel agency for 32 years. And I remember we were hiring locally. Usually it didn't happen that way. And then I saw people coming in for interviews. I was like, really? And then I had to think to myself, that's because no one you can't do different if you don't know different. So.
Which, if you hear, I just want to focus on Cleveland, it's across the country.
Right.
Most municipalities, the first thing that comes out of any elected person's mouth is we can give tax abatement. We can take, and it is. And every city's doing that. Now, I always use Microsoft as an example. If Microsoft wanted to open up a Midwest headquarters, they want to send a team, Clinton, or whoever prepares. And they'll say, well, we'll give you 30-year tax abatement. And they're going to go to Chicago, and guess what Chicago's going to say? 30-year tax abatement. Microsoft is not going to bring entry-level workers to Cleveland to answer the phone or do whatever. You have to have a pool of resources for companies to come to any city to work. And one of the things that I've asked is when a municipality says tax abatement, and it's granted, you never see the offset in the books, unless I'm just making up the number. So X company, because of the tax abatement, gets a $5 million pass a year. Is that money actually offset in income tax revenue or whatever? Because when you give tax abatement, it hurts your schools, because that's money that doesn't go there. That's money that we have to somewhat, as citizens who live in that municipality, have to make up. Because somebody's going to say, well, we're having a budget decrement, so we need to increase the sales tax or whatever. So
So while you're talking about tax abatement and those things, as far as, and I'm, again, I don't do, and I'm not responsible for, city governance or regional or state or any of those things. But I do know this, Cleveland is within 12 hours of 75% of the nation's population. We used to have a saying when we were there that you could go from East 9th and Lakeside, 150-mile radius, and anything you needed to produce, steel, glass, polymer, rubber, any of those products could be produced within 150 miles of Cleveland. You have, obviously intermodal, you have an international port for shipping. You have rail infrastructure. Now, I'm not gonna, East Palestine notwithstanding. And you have, Ohio's the fourth longest or largest number of interstate highway miles in the country. So your infrastructure is here. Now, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, but as far as I'm concerned, you're selling location, like real estate, location, location, location. The last part of my toolbox is gonna be, I have a workforce that is second to none. And I would be out there just selling the crap out of Case Western, John Carroll, the colleges that we have that are here, that are educating our engineers with best and brightest that you can. Because people send their kids from overseas to get educated at Case, okay? If they have the opportunity to, I'd rather have them learn and then live here, not learn and leave if we have the opportunity.
I say it's interesting because some years ago we were doing some things for some companies. If you look at it, approximately a 90-minute or 90-mile ride in any direction, you'll pass anywhere, any direction you go except north, because I put you in a lake, at least 15 colleges in either direction. And I don't think we really take advantage of that.
100%. And so if you had a responsible group, and again, I'm not talking about policy, I'm not talking about political, I'm just talking about somebody who understands that, and I'm a transplant, I'm from Puerto Rico. I love this city, I love this area, I love the drive along the shoreway, I don't care what anybody says. We have professional sports, we have the arts, we have Playhouse Square, we have the museum, we have everything here that is first class, as far as I'm concerned. I think our orchestra is like 1 or 2 in the world. So with all those things, why do we have such a drain on our population? Why have people left? Well, they didn't leave the area, they left Cleveland, okay? So how do you invigorate that? How do you make that happen? How do you do those things? The corporate citizens, we used to have 28 corporate headquarters located in Cleveland in 1987. Today there are 6. Wow. So you have gotten, and it's an understanding that we have to make clear. There's a relationship to responsible corporate citizenship and the population that live and work there. Because if we have 50 corporate 1,000 companies that are located in Cleveland, I guarantee you're going to have a great school system. You're going to have second to none infrastructure, because those companies operate on that bottom line. I have to get product out, I have to get information out, I have to do things. And without that, it takes a team. So you have to have the ability. It's not just about tax abatement, because I understand that's a tool in the toolkit. But show me where it makes sense for my company to locate in this area, Greater Cleveland area.
And some of the entities you mentioned, like the museum, the waterfront, those are peripheral. And that's important. That's important because nobody should be working more than, let's say, 5 days a week. I need some place to relax on Saturday and Sunday after I go to mass and church. What I've been experiencing, let's say, over the last 7 to 10 years, there's not that much to offer. We want to, some Clevelanders, whoever that might be, they want to develop these sedated toys. So what? Now I can walk down 4th Street and drink.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. But and it's what I'm saying to you. There's something about civic pride and made in Cleveland, made in Ohio. There were things that you could do, and there were part of that action when they did the development of the flats at one point in the 80s. That was the place to be.
Well, part of the problem too is the outlook that people that live here have about the city and about themselves. If you talk to people who come here from out of town, like for conventions,
They
and
love
whatever,
it. They love it.
They, and, you know, and they say, "Wow, I never thought that this," because you know they had their preconceived notion of what the city was, and then when they come and experience it, and they come back, it's people who live here who undersell and downrate the city, not those who come from the outside.
I don't disagree, but I think that message comes from the top. Now, I won't say who said it, but there was a certain mayor that said Cleveland is the butthole of the nation.
I'll say it.
Well, okay, but to me, if that's the case, like I said, I think that the people who I have friends from all over the country, and when they come here, you look at the sites, you look at the marinas, you look at the cost of living in this city.
Oh, it's great. If you can make the money.
There it is. And so when you look at it, you can't disengage economic opportunity from civic development. You can't unhinge that. You cannot. You need to have that connection and those things that make it not only profitable, but livable for companies that are going to relocate or be here.
We're gonna move on to the next topic. I'm just gonna add this real quick. And I understand, I have friends who come here, they're 3 days in and out.
Sure.
And I understand that.
Sure.
And it depends on where you're coming from.
Mhm.
I used to be an active member of American College Healthcare Executives, and our national convention every year was in Chicago in February. But there were 15,000 people. And I walked to the president, his name was Stu Westbury at the time, and said, Stu, why can't we hold this and or some other place? And he said, look around. It's packed every year. Now, Chicago has something to offer. It wasn't as violent as it is now, but it has something to offer. Good segue to go into housing. The housing stock that everybody says in Cleveland is old. There's no doubt about that. Pre-World War II, a little bit after. Okay, as Jeff said, his mom's been in her house for
Since 1959.
59, some 60 some odd years. Okay. We're out of space in Cleveland. Most developers are not going to want to build 1 or 2 homes and walk away. They want, I'm just exaggerating again, 60 acres to build. Okay. But what you do see are apartments, and I understand certain areas cannot stand to have homes built, so everything is becoming vertical now, right? Most people who live in apartments, that's kind of a short term, because especially if you're married, as soon as you have maybe 1 or 2 children, you gotta go. If you look on, let's call it the actuarial table, most apartment buildings, their life cycle is only listed for about 25 years, if that. Okay. So when these yuppies are new, or the younger folks have the children, there's no place really for them to live in Cleveland. I mean, talking about Cleveland proper. So off to the suburbs they go. And there's some considerations that go into that. Well, I'll pay a little bit more extra taxes because the school system out in Solon, or even Twinsburg, or Orange, or whatever the case might be, is better. Okay. If you decide, if you can find a home in Cleveland, you have to make a decision. Is my child really going to be educated here? Or am I going to be stuck with Al for the next 25 years because he doesn't have the ability to read? Or do I come out of pocket and send that young man or young lady to a Benedictine or St. Ignatius, a Halfway Brown, a Holy Name, or whatever the case might be? So then, as you mentioned, it's relatively inexpensive to live in Cleveland. Now, you can't take the atypical salary here, because one thing that we didn't mention, Cleveland is listed as the poorest urban city in America.
Right. That's right.
Okay. So depending on who you are and what you do, there's some people here doing very, very well. You're not going to be able to move from here to Washington, D.C.
No.
Or Los Angeles.
Right.
Even in Miami.
Right.
Okay. So I know I'm gonna keep going back to this education piece, until we can develop our public school system to be viable, and you're getting a pretty good product out, then you can attract businesses here. Then you can have individuals who can afford homes. Again, we're still out of space here. Jeff's mother lives in the Lee Harvard area. Even some of the suburbs are old.
Mhm.
The housing stock is old.
Sure.
So what do we do?
So again, it's profit driven, and you look at how new housing is done. I personally, I got to tell you, when you look at downtown, those offices that used to house corporate headquarters and law firms and accounting firms are now condos. Okay, right. I don't get that model, because a corporate office in those buildings are going to spend off a lot more in tax money than somebody who's just living there. Okay, because you're looking at taxable income for 500, 1,000 employees. And I appreciate the developers just taking and repurposing these buildings, because they were built commercially and built to last. I don't know how sustainable that is, to tell you the truth. I don't know how, if you look, even like the Plain Dealer moved to the suburbs. I mean, they all moved out. So I don't get that, and maybe it's just me and I'm old. But to me, I would think that, and most corporates have a policy when they're looking at relocating corporate headquarters, it becomes the Hunger Games. All the cities are viable. We did it with Sherwin-Williams, for example. But the corporate citizens that are here, typically with their top executives, what are they doing? They're relocating them. They're providing them housing. They're saying, okay, you're going to get your kids in the best schools. We're going to make sure that these things happen for you. Okay, that's the private sector retaining talent.
Right.
Okay. Honestly, to me, I think that government ought to take a lesson, take a page of that, and just say, if you want the best, this is what you need to do. Let's attract this talent, and partner. Remember when the city was in default in '78, he got elected. Every Friday morning there would be a round table of every corporate CEO in the mayor's red room. We're going to work through this. We're going to do these things together. I haven't seen that kind of synergy between government and private sector. Maybe there is, and maybe I'm just out of touch, but I just don't see it.
I think part of, and I agree with you, Hiram, I think part of it is we have the government somewhat dependent on the private sector, and the private sector really is not truly dependent upon the government. So you don't have that synergy anymore, without the individuals in it. Let me bring up a term. It's called gentrification.
Gentrification.
And again, my research assistant being Ayl, in Black Enterprise, an article written by Burks. There's an ordinance in Louisville, Kentucky that was passed. And the title of that ordinance is Historically Black Neighborhood Ordinance. That's it. Where there's an assessment that's done that has to be completed by any developer that comes into a predominantly minority neighborhood. And if they don't pass that assessment saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to do this? Whatever. The permit's not granted. There's a section, I don't know if anybody's been to Louisville, called Smoketown, that used to be a predominantly black neighborhood. And this is prior to the ordinance being passed. Smoketown is no longer a predominantly black neighborhood because the four of us who once lived there, we came back. There was a for sale sign in the yard. The same house now is for sale for $675,000, like you mentioned earlier, or some of the apartment rents are $2,200. So the minorities were displaced. So the city of Louisville stood up and said no. And it's important to note here, Louisville is in the South.
Right.
I'm just going to use a city name. But that doesn't happen here in Cleveland.
And I would attribute that to really, and I know this is tough, but intelligent urban planning, where where you take into consideration what that historic district is, and then take into consideration how it's supposed. I lived that firsthand. Ignatius actually bought up. Ohio City used to be El Barrio. It used to be the neighborhood. I mean, we had a lot of Latinos that were there.
I lived over there.
And I will tell you that it right now plays hell to keep Latinos in there because you had Ignatius buy up how many houses, and it expanded. This is my alma mater. This is my school, and then add to that, Ohio City Redevelopment Corporation, OCRA, decided that we're going to be 5 minutes or 10 minutes from downtown, so we're going to put the money into redeveloping these century houses.
Right.
And they did they put the money into it. They did what they needed to do, and again, that's profitable. But then what happens to the Latinos? If you the Latinos that were there in the 50s that bought their houses for $10,000, the developer comes in and says, "Listen, I'm going to give you 40," without an argument. We're going to give you $40,000, and this is back in the 70s. But you're kidding? There was Julio and Juan saying, "Listen, I can buy in Parma. I can buy in," and so Brooklyn, they moved.
Yeah.
Again, looking for better for their family, right? Well, okay. You're exactly correct with respect to these historic neighborhoods. And remember that, man, you could smell a arroz con pollo going down Bridge Avenue. It was very nice. Now, I mean, what do you have down Bridge Avenue? You have yuppies. I mean, and it's great. I mean, it's great. You see the families that are there. But again, what did we do from our responsibility to the people who were building Cleveland at the time? And to your point, your mom still lives in the Lee Harvard area, right? I mean, they're still there. You lose something. You lose a little bit of that identity when you lose a cultural center. You used to have Slavic Village. I think they're trying to do the Irish Bend project down around Ohio City. Well, now they're talking, that's millions of dollars infused into that area, okay? And while I get it, what did we do to attract job creators, companies that are going to be providing manufacturing or goods and services or sustainable plans for people to live, work?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't even have to, we can just go a couple of miles east of where we are, up Euclid Avenue, to look what Cleveland Clinic did as far as gentrification to that area.
And I think that area was decimated by that. I mean,
And most definitely it was. It was brought in, you know, now the plus of it is now you've expanded your tax base. Your tax base is more viable, for lack of a better term. But the question is, where did those people who bought those houses on 79th and 81st and what have you some years ago, now they've been displaced, you know, the new condos and all that come in, and where are they now? Where do they go? And that's me, and it's not just unique to Cleveland. My sister lives in the DC area, and there's a guy there that I talk to who he lives in the district still, and he talks about how gentrification has really just destroyed neighborhoods in Washington DC as well.
But see, it's interesting that what everybody said, and I'm gonna talk about the new shingles in Cleveland. I don't know if you've seen them. It's called the blue tarp roof.
oh yeah, I know what they are. Oh, sure.
And again, you could be 30, 50, or 60, or 71, or whatever age. Once your roof goes, you can forget it. Okay, or if the foundation goes, but more so you see the blue roof. What's interesting, we don't hear the discussion on how they could redirect CDBG funds.
Money,
Right.
yeah, community building block grant money, right?
Right, but nobody's saying, well, we might only be able to fix 3 roofs in Lee Harvard this quarter, or maybe the year, but 3 is better than none.
Well, they allocate millions to drop those houses. That's the other side too.
That's the other side.
Right.
Because you have to drop them because once the blue tarp is gone, it's it.
Right.
And you talked about planning, which is somewhat an oxymoronic
That's
statement.
why I said it that way.
How do you plan when you don't know how to plan? If you look at Florida, they have a committee, it's usually at the county level, called LUTs, Land Use Utilization. And before a developer comes in and he says, I just bought this 90 or 190 acre pine farm and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put so many homes, I'm going to have a shopping center here, or whatever. and it's transparent to the public.
Right.
We usually what happens in this area, you really don't have transparency. You have shock and awe.
Right.
Okay. And that's sad. It's all of a sudden, wow, they're gonna put this here?
Well, Al, and going back to what we were discussing in the first hour, it's all related. Because if you look at the homes within the city of Cleveland, they're older homes for the most part. And those older homes are painted with lead paint. Children are growing up in those homes, being contaminated with lead paint poisoning. Try to say that fast 5 times, which then makes it that much more difficult for them to learn, which then makes their education less than quality, which then puts them on the fast track to either being generational welfare or fast track to penal institutions.
Well, and Jeff, I agree with you, and I think all the panelists picked it up. You started with something as a foundation. My foundation just for this discussion have to be education. I think what most municipalities are missing, especially when you vote, which most municipalities don't vote anymore.
I hope we get to that.
Yeah, we're not going to get to that today. I'm not here till 6, Jeff. The people first mantra is gone.
And so,
Right.
right, and so what you have found is that, and again, stakeholders in the community identify who they are, and by and large, the CBDG money that you're talking about, that's left at the discretion of the council people that administer that, and quite frankly, you don't need a degree to be a council person, and you're looking at politically how things work. And there were people who their hearts were in the right place and they've served very well. They named buildings after them. But when you get down to what impacts, there's some core basic political principles. Rhodes used to say, you pull his wallet out. If you put something in it, you get the guy's vote. You take something out, you lose his vote. If I live in an area where, and I say it, I call it the tranquility factor. If I know I leave my house in the morning and I know that pretty much when I come back 5 o'clock 6 o'clock that evening, my kids or my wife is safe. The house is in the same shape as it is when I left it, and pretty much I'm not seeing it on the 6 o'clock news. I'm okay.
Well, we're going to have the panel come back maybe next month or even in May, depending on everybody's schedule, or some other replacements. We'll have to find somebody who went to Michigan to take Ohio State.
Well, another easy, just look at people who have their degrees hung in their rear view mirror so they can park in the handicap places. That's all you got to do.
See, I want to thank you for having me too. I think this has been a great discussion, and thank the other panelists that are here. Thank you, Al, for hosting us, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity.
Yes,
Thank Hiram,
Thank you.
Richanda, and Jeff, and again, thank the listening audience. Again, you've been listening to Body Talk on the No Static Radio Network, call signals WMDS. And again, we'll see you next week. And I just want to leave you with a thought. The most important thing that you can do is to think. Think and ask questions. Don't be dictated to. This is Body Talk, and see you next week.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Oh, thank you. Very nice.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry we didn't get through all the topics.
You know what? I think it was pretty
We needed more time.
Yeah.
I want to bring up the black.
1976. I don't care what that person.
Is that right? You said you born in 1926?
76. That's what
You're
I say.
younger than me, Jeff.
That's what I say. The birth certificate.
Diversity.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in to Body Talk with your host, Ayl Bridges, here on the station where we don't bring no static, but we sure enough bring the noise, nostaticradio.net. Make sure you guys check us out on social media where we absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio LLC, on Twitter at No Static _radio, on Instagram at TheReal_No Static Radio, and on YouTube at No Static Radio. Also, if you guys would like to listen to replays of this show and others on NoStaticRadio.net, please make sure you check us out on Mixler, Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio on the toolbar for replays of this show and others, and for continuous streaming, check us out on TuneIn.com, LiveOnlineRadio.net, or MediaQ for continuous streaming uninterrupted of this show and all others on the platform, and for all things No Static Radio, including up-and-coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here. Please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net. And guys, we also take donations, so you feel like uplifting small businesses here in the community. Our Cash App is $ No Static Radio. We'd like to thank you for tuning in, and you guys know what it is. We've got more music for your listening pleasure here on Your Voice of the Revolution on staticradio.net, powered by Google, partner with Colors, and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines and Hot Girls Gear. You guys take care, be safe, enjoy the weather out there, and we'll see you this evening with the Reverend Doctor with today's gospel music show here on Your Voice of the Revolution on staticradio.net. Stay safe and peace.
Don't look like I'm
Nice pen. What's the pen?
Which
On
one?
the coat.
So this one, this was actually from the Commodores and not the singing group, the Ohio.
I remember not to have two comedians on again.
Well, that's how they go.
Oh, yeah.
I always tell my head, this is the German side. I just like the Italian German